It's 6 p.m. on D-Day.
The day has worn on, and by now the men everywhere are exhausted. Yet still they fight, and the action in the field this hour is notes from the airborne zones in the west and the east. By 1800, USS Quincy has sent more than 200 rounds of 8-inch shells into the German artillery positions in and around Saint-Côme-du-Mont. Even the old church steeple has collapsed under the weight of the fire. With the enemy totally suppressed, Allen's paratroopers move out of their enclave at Basse-Abbeville and follow the Douve River until they find Johnson's group at La Barquette. However, this is not the fresh fighting force Johnson had hoped to throw against the Germans. Spent and exhausted from simply fighting for survival all day long, they are in no shape for offensive action.
And over east of the bridges over the Orne and the Caen Canal, by now the Germans have reoccupied the Merville battery. Yep, remember, the 9th Battalion left. Steiner is back, but what state are the guns in? The British did try to destroy them as best they could without sappers and engineers, but they did not in fact succeed. The Germans managed to get the guns in casemates 1 and 2 in sort of working order. They are no longer able to fire at the regular rate of fire though. That is 6 shots per minute. They are now able to fire about 1 shot every 10 minutes. So 2 shots every 10 minutes total, but still, there is a lot of myth about the Merville battery that the guns found are only 75 millimeters and couldn't reach the beaches. That's not true. They are 100 millimeter Czech guns and that they have been destroyed. Also not true. And all 4 guns will eventually be brought back to firing condition by Steiner and his men.
Looking at the dispositions at D-Day, it seems like German artillery could have played a key role in defeating or even preventing an invasion attempt in Normandy. Long-range naval guns would have intercepted the Allied warships, and those that made it to the shoreline would have been destroyed by pre-sighted killing zones of mortars and howitzers. But how come that didn't happen? How come the heavy gun batteries were mostly silent or ineffective this day?
The fact that German high command could not predict the when and where of the invasion made formulating a coherent defensive concept quite difficult. There were plausible possibilities all over the coastline of northern and western Europe, from Norway to Spain, and even if they could have narrowed it down to northern France, just that area would still greatly overextend their defensive forces. The Wehrmacht's reserves are bound to arrive late in every scenario. A dilemma. In charge of the defenses, Rommel predicted that there was only one logical solution to that problem. The war will be won or lost there on the beach. We have only one possibility: to bring the enemy to a stop. We must get him as long as he is in the water and is fighting to get to land. Reinforcement troops will never be able to get to the battle. It is foolish to even count on this. The German war games in spring 1944 predicted a possible alternative scenario. On D-Day, the Allied Armada would disembark their troops amidst a hail of shell fire from the coastal artillery. Shrapnel and high-explosive shells would tear up the beaches as howitzers and anti-invasion guns engaged the landing enemy. Those who made it ashore would then be greeted by screeching Nebelwerfer rockets, all while German grenadiers would lob mortar rounds into clustered attackers. Many of the Wehrmacht's commanders were indeed pleased by these optimistic assessments. It was an affirmation that the Atlantic Wall concept would work if it was given enough artillery support. After all, despite Allied superiority in, well, almost everything, strategic scenarios like this usually favor the defender. But the seeds for failure were sown long ago. One major reason why the German artillery concept has failed is the fact that there wasn't much of a concept to begin with, no coherent strategy or tactical doctrine. The Kriegsmarine does not field a unified autonomous coastal defense force, nor is there an overall commander in charge. In Normandy, the coastal defense technically falls under the responsibility of Admiral Kreinke of Naval Command West, as we've seen. However, his personal vision of fighting off amphibious invasions is still very Great War-ish. Like the Germans did before at the coast of Flanders, he wants defense centered around ports and not focused on fighting over large open beaches. It is, of course, sensible enough to predict that the Allies have to capture a major port to support the landing sooner or later. But this is 1944 and not 1916, and no longer the main prerogative. Still, the Kriegsmarine main setup has been to concentrate its efforts on engaging enemy ships offshore from static coastal batteries. Their giant bunkers are set up directly at the shoreline in visual range of the enemy and supported by sophisticated fire control stations. Traditionally mimicking combat on the high seas, these are equipped with large caliber naval guns, usually between 105 to 152 millimeters. That's similar to those of destroyers and can hurl shells of equal destructive power above and across the waves. The coastal battery at Longues-sur-Mer, which I talked about this morning, is state-of-the-art. Its sophisticated fire control bunker is built right into the forward edges of the cliffs. It has a tracking center that is electrically powered and directly feeds data from the rangefinders to the 4 casemates over landlines. Inside the casemates are 150mm C-36 Skoda cannons, strong enough to go toe-to-toe with enemy warships. Protected by 2-meter-thick roofs and an array of 20mm flat guns, it should not be easily taken out by enemy bombardment either. A Soviet 122mm is there to fire illumination rounds during night engagements, but is used today to fire on Omaha and Gold Beaches. But you can go larger. The battery Blainville-la-Corvée houses a gigantic 380mm gun taken off the French cruiser Jean Bart. Plans called for a trio of those, but only the one was ready in time for today. Sadly for the Germans, it's no use at all today, as the fighting happens beyond the range of that gun's firing solution. Same thing with the battery at Clos de Rance, where 3 170mm K-18 guns are just out of range of the invasion beaches. But the poster children of the Atlantic Wall are the 406mm guns of Battery Lindemann at Sangatte and the 380mm of Battery Tot at Cap Grinet. But these are light years away from the actual invasion. Only a couple of such weapons, like the Krisbeck battery at Saint-Marcouf, are actually in any position to engage the invasion. Its 4 powerful and casemated Skoda 210mm K-39-40 guns duke it out with Allied destroyers off Utah Beach all morning long. Of course, these coastal gun installations are prime targets for Allied bombers. The batteries, their adjoining radar stations, and railways have been hit hard all throughout spring 1944, and especially during the run-up to today. Many of the smaller sites at Saint-Marcouf, Descoville, Morsalines, or Gatteville were struck several times by British and American bombing squadrons just before the invasion. At midnight, Bomber Command singles out the batteries on the Cotentin Peninsula close to the drop zones of the paratroopers. Then, throughout the night, the bombing fleet pounds the big batteries at Pointe-du-Hoc, Longues-sur-Mer, Montfleury, and La Pernelle. More than 1,000 RAF bombers drop 5,000 tons, an average of 500 tons of bombs per battery. The effectiveness of these bombardments is tough to assess, often depending on which historian you ask. Generally, those casemates which the Germans have actually finished in time most often withstand the attacks without taking much damage, but many half-finished or open-air batteries are just plain wrecked. The 4 122mm guns at Martin de Vareville are so damaged they do not get to fire a single shell today. Others, though, like the Merville battery, survive the airstrikes without so much as a scratch. We've seen a lot about Merville, and the battery is the target of nearly 1,000 bombs, of which maybe 50 land inside the battery's perimeter, and only 2 actually hit the casemates without doing damage. This also shows how Allied intelligence can be prone to misjudgment as well, since the powerful modern artillery they expect to find there does not exist, just old Czech field guns, which could still reach Sword Beach, but anyhow. It isn't just attacks from the air that give the German artillery batteries such a hard time. Allied Naval Command assigns at least 1 battleship or cruiser for every German battery for naval bombardment. Most smaller gun batteries are, in fact, successfully suppressed, and especially those in open pits remain inactive when their crews stay inside their shelters. Even Longues-sur-Mer or the Azeville battery with its French 105mm guns come under continuous Allied naval attacks on D-Day. As I said, many of the battery sites are still open and especially vulnerable to air and sea attacks. Although Organisation Todt increased its efforts to build bunkers and casemates in order to house the artillery under concrete roofs, there was neither enough time nor resources to finish it all. Near Gatteville, there are 6 155mm gun emplacements under construction that could threaten Utah Beach. 4 of them are still under construction today. Much of the defenses do still resemble Great War-style artillery positions, with guns settled in open kettle emplacements. Most common are the smaller VF-600 emplacements that house pedestal-mounted 50mm guns, which have been cannibalized from obsolete tanks. Their only defense is camouflage. Okay, sometimes a metal shield or a row of sandbags. Right. There are also many problems with the bunkers themselves. Because of the lack of steel, the batteries have only limited abilities of traversing and are often only able to cover the beach side or the landward side. Ventilation in the bunkers often does not work at all. The guns themselves are mostly captured ones of all types and calibers, for which there is only a limited amount of ammunition available. And that's the naval artillery. This is something that only gets worse for the Army's artillery. One major opponent of the Wehrmacht command's optimism at the War Games is General der Artillerie Erich Marx. Marx is certainly one of the most interesting characters on the German side. Once considered a rising star, he was heavily involved in the planning phase of Operation Barbarossa and consequently became a vocal critic of the whole thing, predicting the many risks and problems on the strategic level. He also lost a leg and 2 sons to the invasion. So now, crippled, disgraced, and basically exiled, he is one of those backseat generals in the West, commanding 84th Corps in Normandy. As General of Artillery, Marx is also said to have a certain feeling about things, a vibe, right? Not unlike Rommel. From his headquarters at Saint-Lô, he began his own studies of the coastlines in northern France, concluding that the invasion might happen right in his sector. Then, during the German War Games, Marx repeatedly criticizes Rommel's indecisiveness, saying that everything points towards Normandy as the prime target, with the Allies most likely striking somewhere between the Calvados coast and the rivers Orne and Vire. So he wants the roads between Caen and Cherbourg to be fortified and the majority of the army's artillery brought into his sector. Rommel, though, is hesitant to stake everything on Marx's assessments, and is probably also a bit miffed by being openly criticized as well. Marx repeatedly says he has emplacements without guns, ammunition depots without ammunition, minefields without mines, and a large number of men in uniform with hardly a soldier among them. Still, the role of the Army's artillery is tricky. Although its commanders have been quick to criticize the static naval batteries as battleships of the dunes, they don't really have a specific anti-amphibious landing doctrine either. Instead, they treat it like a typical breakthrough scenario on a typical battlefield. This means that an Allied beachhead is to be isolated and sealed off before being destroyed by concentrated counterattacks. At places like Salerno in September 1943 and Anzio in January this year, this tactic had initially achieved success, although ultimately they were beaten back at those places, partly by overwhelming Allied aerial and naval support. Those landings could have been opposed, and neither of those places had significant coastal defenses prepared. Would Rommel's defenses, all these mines, obstacles, and barbed wire at the beaches, give them the edge this time? Rommel is certainly counting on it, as he has ordered the Army artillery to cover each and every sector of the beaches by some sort of guns. The Army began reinforcing the French coast with their own artillery ever since the end of 1940, back when their own plans of a cross-channel invasion were still maybe in the cards. But the demands of the Eastern Front hollowed out those positions and depots until only a skeleton force remained. Only near the end of 1943 do resources start to come back. Traditionally, the German army concentrates its artillery in medium field guns, howitzers, and mortars. The The first main piece is the 75mm Field Gun 38. It is a conventionally designed cannon with a semi-automatic horizontal sliding breech block. The monoblock tube has a slotted cylindrical muzzle brake attached to it, as well as a hydro-pneumatic recuperator. Its max range is around 12.5 kilometers, firing mostly HE shells and hollow charges. The second main pieces are the 105 and 150mm Field Howitzer 18s. Another rather outdated artillery gun that is heavily modified throughout the war. Outfitted with a continuous pull firing mechanism and cartridge case obturation, the howitzers can max range 13 to 15 kilometers. Howitzer batteries are usually concentrated further inland, usually around 5 to 7 kilometers. For example, in front of Utah Beach at Brickhor Manor, there is that battery of 4 105mm guns like 5 kilometers from the shore. Its observers, though, are close to the beach to direct the guns by phone. Besides high explosives, the howitzers can also fire specialized anti-personnel rounds and smoke projectiles. Speaking of smoke, one of the most dangerous tools of the artillery triad is the Nebelwerfer 35. Starting out as a smoke thrower, which is basically what Nebelwerfer means, this multi-barreled mortar projector has been redesigned to fire high-explosive rocket projectiles. With a range of 6,700 meters, it can fire projectiles of up to 300 millimeters. It has also become well known for its screeching sound and has picked up the nicknames Screaming Mimi or Moaning Minnie. But the most fearsome caliber in the German arsenal is the 88mm. The original 88mm Flak 36 and improved 41 are equally destructive as anti-aircraft guns and tank killers. At the coast, inside the most powerful bunkers, the H677, they house the 88mm Pak 4341. Its range is long enough to cover 3 kilometers of coastline. Out in the open, the 88 is usually put on a cruciform multi-purpose pedestal to cover all 360 degrees. With a high velocity of 1,000 meters per second, it can fire 20 rounds per minute. Ammunition is generally high explosive, either on a time fuse or a percussion fuse. Another type of projectile is the APC-BC, the armor-piercing capped ballistic shell. This kind of ammunition is designed to make tankers think twice before rumbling out into the open. Rommel has wanted to bring as much tank-killing power to the coastline as possible. He has first-hand experience on how long-range anti-tank fire can stop armored advances before they even materialize as a threat. However, most of the positions at the coast are outfitted with pretty outdated 50mm guns. The much more effective 75mm Pak 40 is barely around Normandy at all, as it has been reserved for assault divisions, not fortress divisions. The 50mm guns are usually anti-tank guns from the Eastern Front, now dubbed anti-invasion guns. Still, Rommel's team has done a tremendous job stocking up on artillery pieces and ammunition from wherever they could get their hands on it. Scouring old fortifications and forgotten warehouses all over Western Europe, his staff has gathered all kinds of calibers and brought them to the coastline. One of the prizes is, for example, the French Saint-Chamond Model 1916 with its 21-kilometer range. This stockpiling, however, presents a different kind of problem. The 17th Army now possesses over 32 different kinds of artillery and anti-tank guns. Belgian, Czech, Polish, Soviet field guns, Austrian mountain artillery, French tank cannons, and all of them must be supplied by some variety of 252 different types of shells and grenades. Sorting these out is a quartermaster's worst nightmare, made even worse by the fact there's only a limited amount of shells for most of these foreign calibers. 47 types are no longer even produced. So once they run out of ammo, that's it. Speaking of ammunition, even for the German-made guns, the supply situation in northern France is bad, like real bad. For once, it is partly because of enemy activity too. French resistance fighters sabotage the railway lines, and Allied bomber squadrons target depots, and Under the transportation plan, the Germans have to commit a large amount of force to guard the many bridges across the Seine and Loire rivers, which means the actual supply columns are steered by French and Belgian civilians. And a German paycheck does not buy much loyalty and motivation in 1944. This has led to an overall shortage of artillery ammunition for the defenders at the Atlantic Wall, but it is especially worse for certain models, like the light and medium Model 1918 field howitzers. Produced almost exclusively in Germany, it takes forever for these shells to arrive at the French coast. Always nearly bordering on treasonous, German bureaucracy does seemingly everything in its power to complicate things. In theory, the whole supply system in northern France falls under the direction of Quartermaster General West, directed from Paris by General Finch and General Eckstein. Problem is, that command is not simply subordinate to Oberkommando West, but also answers to the military commander of France, General von Stülpnagel, as well as taking orders from Quartermaster General of OKH General Wagner in Berlin. So the supplies are effectively under 3 different commanding generals, receiving directions from 3 different offices, and no, OB West does not have the right of way here. Altogether, this has made an already unwieldy supply situation even worse. There are many reported cases today of guns and their shells not being at the same place when the invasion strikes. Artillery guns at Omaha, for example, run out of shells because the majority of their supplies have been awaiting transport at Saint-Lô for weeks. Okay, you might now be thinking, the Atlantic Wall is just a series of badly managed strongpoints held by third-rate soldiers with no intention of fighting it out. But that is far from the truth. The Crisbeck battery, even alone and half-finished, has been a star today for the Germans. And it isn't alone. There are many illustrations of how tough the German batteries actually are. Just imagine, though, if the Germans had more of these multifaceted artillery positions. What might have happened if the Kriegsmarine had installed the 380mm gun batteries at both Le Havre and Cherbourg as they had planned? What if all 6 Gatteville 155mm gun emplacements had been finished by today and not just 2? Or the major defensive stronghold that was supposed to secure Carentan and defend Utah Beach? How would the battle have played out if Rommel had trusted in General Mark's judgment and directed all his artillery towards that peninsula? That is one hell of a what if.
But there are many people, whole organizations in fact, whose jobs are to deal with what ifs.
As in, what if we can convince the enemy that the invasion they expect will happen elsewhere, and at a different time?
Exactly. The German response to the Allied landings today is a mess. But why is that? I mean, the dysfunction in the German high command is one thing, but very importantly, the Allies have been running the largest and most ambitious military deception plan in history. They've built ghost armies of inflatable tanks and imaginary men. They've hoodwinked the Germans with a network of double agents. They've sent heavy bombers on diversionary raids. This is Operation Fortitude.
So, the German response to the Allied landings is a bit of a mess. But why is that? I mean, the dysfunction in the German high command is one thing, but on top of that, the Allies have been running the largest and most ambitious military deception plan in history. They've built ghost armies of inflatable tanks and imaginary men. They've hoodwinked the Germans with a network of double agents. They've sent heavy bombers on diversionary raids. This is Operation Fortitude. Its scale is truly remarkable, even more so since it is just one part of the wider deception mission for D-Day, codenamed Operation Bodyguard. Bodyguard comes under the authority of a secret planning committee called the London Controlling Section, LCS, headed by Lieutenant Colonel John Bevan. Bevan started drawing up the draft for Bodyguard strategy in December 1943 after returning to London from the Tehran Conference. The aim is to enable the success of the invasion of Europe by deceiving the German High Command as to the timing, weight, and direction of it. Bevan was inspired by a comment that British Prime Minister Winston Churchill made to Soviet leader Joseph Stalin that, in wartime, the truth must always be protected by a bodyguard of lies. Fortitude is a joint operation between the LCS and the Deception Department of SHAEF, a department called Ops B, which is commanded by Noel Wild. Wild draws up the first draft of Fortitude on January 30th, 1944, but then there is a bit of a power struggle. Colonel David Strangeways, who had run deception operations for Monty in the North African campaign, rewrites the entire plan at the end of February. In the months leading up to D-Day, Fortitude's basic goals are to confuse the Germans as to the timing of the invasion and to convince them that the Allies are focused on landing in Norway and at Pas de Calais, hopefully resulting in the Germans keeping their best fighting forces away from Normandy. Now that the landings have begun, the goal is to stall the influx of German reinforcements by keeping up the pretense that Normandy is a mere diversion, and that the real landings in Norway and Pas de Calais are soon to come. To this end, Fortitude is split in two. Fortitude North deals with Norway, and Fortitude South with Pas de Calais. Both exploit pre-existing German fears. The British invasion of Norway back in 1940 may have been a failure, but the Germans, and Hitler especially, have long thought the Allies would try again. Likewise, since Calais is the closest point to Britain, they have anticipated an invasion there. The first step for the Allies in both cases is the creation of fictitious armies. For Fortitude North, this is the British Fourth Army, which is an old, reactivated formation from the Great War. SHAEF and LCS choose General Sir Andrew Thorne as its commander. He's chosen because the Germans know him well. He was a military attaché in Berlin before the war. Sir Andrew sets up his headquarters in Edinburgh Castle. Fourth Army structure is as follows. The fictitious British 7th Corps is based at Dundee, the fictitious British 2nd Corps at Stirling, and the American 15th Corps in Northern Ireland. The 15th Corps is a real formation, but it will not be used in Operation Neptune itself. Instead, its 3 infantry divisions are training for follow-up roles after the landing. Fortitude North begins with radio games. On March 22nd, fake headquarters communications teams begin sending out messages across Scotland, communicating with fake fighting units and with the fake support and service forces. The plan is that the German wireless interception teams will pinpoint the location of the Fourth Army. There's an early indication that this is working. Just 3 days after these signals start, a Messerschmitt strafes Edinburgh Castle. In April, the Royal Navy begins sending out its own scripted radio traffic. A signaller named John Emery describes some of this. I remember taking part in the land-based deception in Scotland, driving up and down the coast in company with other vehicles, sending dummy messages purporting to be a fleet of destroyers exercising off the coast near Inverness. Spare shipping is assembled at various docks along the Firth of Forth, and the RAF combat air patrols allow a few high-flying Luftwaffe photo reconnaissance planes to catch a glimpse. There's also a diplomatic effort. The LCS instructs the British diplomat Victor Mallet to make a series of demands to neutral Sweden, which include allowing Allied aircraft to refuel at Swedish airfields after flying combat operations. The Swedes refuse these, of course, but German spies report that the Allies are making overtures to Sweden in preparation for an invasion of Norway. Fortitude South is even more ambitious than Fortitude North. It rests on the 1st United States Army Group, Woodage, headquartered in Dover, directly across the channel from Pas de Calais. SHAEF chooses George Patton as Wodage's commander because in North Africa and Sicily, he earned a reputation among the Germans as an effective and aggressive commander. Like the British Fourth Army, Woodage is mostly made up of fictitious units, but it also contains some earmarked for follow-up waves after the first landings. To bring the army group to life, magazines publish the divisional emblems, and men wear the patches in bars and pubs across the country. Woodage has a strength of close to 1 million men, but its actual manpower is little more than a few hundred signal troops. Some of these are in secret tunnels underneath Dover Castle. It was from these tunnels back in 1940 that British commanders directed Operation Dynamo, the evacuation from Dunkirk. Now the signalers fire off radio messages purporting to be an army making ready for an invasion of the continent. There are also mobile signalers who spend their time driving around southeast England. One of them, a corporal named Les Phillips, describes how this works. You would be given a map reference, take the truck to that spot, and at a certain time broadcast according to a script you were given. It might be asking for reinforcements, ammunition supplies, all sorts of things. You'd pretend to be a whole corps. The timing was very important because it had to seem as if one tank was answering another. You had the audio sound of the tanks to hear them too. It was all very secret. Corporal Phillips and his vehicles form part of Quicksilver 2, one of the 6 Quicksilver plans through which the existence of Fusag is communicated to the Germans. But Fusag needs more than just fake radio traffic. I mean, the fake 4th Army up in Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, it's a bit of a stretch for German recon planes, but they can pretty easily reach Dover. What Fusag needs is some tanks. Obviously, SHAEF cannot spare real tanks to just sit in the countryside around Dover. This is where Quicksilver 3 and the Ghost Army come into the picture. The American Ghost Army, or to give them their proper name, the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, works with Montgomery's Deception Crew, R-Force, to build up a bunch of imitation vehicles. Some of these are inflatable tanks and trucks made by the Goodyear Company in the States. Weighing in at just 40 kilos, about 90 pounds. These look like the real thing when photographed from above, but they can be easily lifted and moved around by a few GIs. Prop makers from London's film studios also chip in and build hundreds of wooden vehicles, wooden artillery pieces, and airplanes. These fake vehicles are arranged at realistic-looking bases and airfields. Camouflage netting is strung up, and tent cities spring up around them with imitation buildings and ammo dumps. Tank and tire tracks are plowed into the mud using special rolling tools. Cooking stoves are kept burning to feed non-existent soldiers. At night, recordings of aircraft engines are played over speakers, and special carts fitted with car headlamps run up and down fake runways to simulate aircraft. Fake landing craft are anchored at the coast to create the impression of an army massing for invasion. These are built of canvas stretched over a steel frame, floating on oil drums. A lieutenant colonel in the Royal Engineers describes their use. They looked very realistic, and at half a mile away, I certainly couldn't tell them from the real thing. We'd leave them for 2 or 3 days, then move them elsewhere, so it looked as if the troops were moving around. But all of this, the radio messages and the fake tanks, planes, and boats, they're not enough by themselves. In fact, far more significant is another element, Quicksilver 1. I left it to the end because it's the most important. Quicksilver 1 mobilizes the network of double agents controlled by the top-secret British 20 Committee, the Double Cross Committee. You might recognize the names and code names of some of these agents. The Spaniard Juan Pujol, or Garbo, is probably the most important. Then there's the Polish Air Force captain and former French resistance fighter Roman Czerniawski, or Brutus, and the Portuguese-based Serbian businessman Dusan or Duško Popov, codenamed Tricycle. Astrid will be covering them in more detail today, so I'll leave that to her. All I need to say is that these 3 agents, plus dozens of other men and women operating as far afield as New York, send a constant stream of carefully managed information. It's a mix of facts of limited military value, half-truths, and outright falsehoods designed to convince the Germans that Fusag is heading for Calais. For example, Brutus draws up fake reports on Polish and Free French airborne units due to take part in the invasion. Tricycle hand-delivers a list of Fusag units to his contact in Lisbon. Meanwhile, between January 1944 and D-Day, Garbo alone bombards the Germans with over 500 messages. The work of the double agents turns out to be the most important element. Luftwaffe reconnaissance is so lacking, and the processing of intelligence so poor in Germany, that the vast effort put into Quicksilver 2 and 3, that's the phony radio traffic, imitation vehicles, military bases, that makes very little impact on German thinking. But the Germans do put great stock in their agents, who are double agents, and it is through their communications that the bulk of the information about Fusag and the Allied plans for Calais come to the German attention. One member of LCS will boast, every phase in the story can be directly attributed to the 3 double-cross agents, Garbo, Brutus, and Tricycle. But Just how successful has Fortitude been? Have the Germans bought it? Bletchley Park has been able to monitor the progress of the disinformation campaign through its decryption of German communications. From these decoded messages, the LCS concludes that the Germans have bought the deception. Von Rundstedt reports to OKW on May 29th. The main Allied effort will be against Pas-de-Calais. In addition, the Americans have long ago broken the Japanese diplomatic codes, and they decipher reports of a meeting between Hitler and the Japanese ambassador in which the Führer himself says a landing at Pas-de-Calais is the main Allied goal and that any other landings are diversions. In May, Ultra Decrypts revealed that the Germans have carried out a landing exercise on the assumption that the landings will occur somewhere between Ostend in Belgium and Boulogne in France. Calais is right in the middle of that. This is borne out in the positioning of German forces today. The German 15th Army, probably their strongest force on the northern coast of France, is deployed in Pas-de-Calais. That does not mean that Fortitude fools everyone completely. In late May, Rommel wrote, "From the Allied point of view, the number one objective is to get firmly ashore. This is improbable on the Pas-de-Calais coast, which is strongly defended, but is possible on the Normandy coast, which is barely fortified." He noted that the RAF allowed the Germans to get very close to the buildup of Fusag around Dover, but were driven away fiercely when they approached the buildup of troops for the 21st Army Group. Nor has Hitler completely discounted the idea of a landing in Normandy. Back in February, he wrote the most likely places for an Allied landing were either the Channel Coast or Normandy. And in April, he did order some extra troops to be sent to beef up defenses in Normandy. And I'm pretty sure the Americans at Omaha Beach today will tell you that the Germans have obviously been planning for the Normandy option. But that's to be expected. See, Fortitude didn't require the Germans to completely dismiss Normandy as an invasion site. Rather, by offering Calais up as a tempting and logical alternative, it has sown confusion in the ranks of German high command. It has played into German assumptions. Not only is Calais the closest landing spot from Britain, but the most aggressive option, providing a far more direct route to Paris than Normandy. But what Formandy has done is to help prevent the Germans from producing a coherent and unified strategy for fighting the landings. The fierce debate between Rommel, Rundstedt, and General de Panzertruppen Freiherr Leo Gehr von Schweppenberg over the deployment of forces for Obi West that I mentioned earlier today can, in part, be put down to the confusion sown by Fortitude. Rundstedt argued that without having nailed down the Allied invasion target, the panzers should be kept inland in a central reserve, whereas Rommel wanted them as close to the beaches as possible. In the end, as you may recall, Hitler intervened and imposed a compromise solution, with Rommel's Army Group B in northern France having 3 panzer divisions and General Johannes Blaskowitz's Army Group G having 3 in the south of the country. The other 4 are held as part of a central reserve in Schweppenberg's Panzer Group West. In that sense, then, Fortitude has been a success. Now the plan switches to the next stage, maintaining the fiction that the Normandy landing is a deception and that the real landings will come elsewhere. For Fortitude South, the aim is to prevent German reinforcements from being moved from Calais to Normandy. Even before the troops landed on the beaches this morning, plans are being set in motion to keep the ruse going. Key to this is ensuring that the Germans continue paying attention to the network of double agents. To this end, Agent Garbo attempted to warn the Germans this morning that the Normandy landings were go. At 3 a.m., he set up his radio equipment for a pre-arranged transmission with his German handlers. The time was chosen because it was early enough to appear genuine, but too late for the Germans to really gain any advantage. Unfortunately for the Germans, their radio operator misses this pre-arranged meeting and does not come on air until 8 a.m. But tomorrow, when the Germans realize the full significance of Garbo's message, their confidence in him only increases further. It also gives him the moral high ground. Garbo will feign disgust at the incompetence of his German contacts and will tell them, "I cannot accept excuses or negligence. Were it not for my ideals, I would abandon the work." Eager to keep Garbo on their side and sure of the value of his information, the Germans will eat up the messages he sends over the coming weeks, in which Garbo will paint the Normandy landings as a diversion. He will send over more and more details about Fusag and its impending attack on Pas-de-Calais. Now, I said that Fortitude is not the only operation to mislead the Germans. I'll go over a couple of the other efforts because, like Fortitude, they will continue over the coming months. In the West, there is Operation Ironside, which uses double agents to give the impression the Allies are planning a landing at the Bay of Biscay, with particular emphasis on Bordeaux. This plays on a pre-existing fear of German High Command, who already carried out anti-invasion drills there back in January. The story is that 2 divisions will land 10 days after the Normandy landings, with a further 6 divisions being sent once a beachhead is established. After capturing Bordeaux, this force would then link up with another supposed landing force in the south of France. There's Operation Zeppelin in the Mediterranean, which aims to tie down German forces in anticipation of a possible Allied landing in the Balkans. For this, the Cairo-based deception department, named A-Force, is using deceptive radio signals to inflate the size of the British forces in the region. Zeppelin has various sub-operations, each of which threaten an Allied landing at places including Crete, mainland Greece, Albania, Croatia, and the south of France. Finally, there's Operation Copperhead. This has already run its course, but it's worth mentioning just because, well, it's kind of funny, actually. Okay. Over the past few months, the 20 Committee's double agents have made it clear to their German handlers that General Bernard Montgomery will be commanding the coming invasion. So at the end of May, the British deployed a body double of Monty to Gibraltar and Algeria, hoping the Germans would take this as a sign that the invasion was not imminent. The British made sure that the visit to Gibraltar was witnessed by a Spanish government official known to be an Abwehr informer. Unfortunately, the plot had to be cut short because the body double, a soldier named M.E. Clifton James, got hammered and staggered around Algiers, and this is not in keeping with the teetotal Monty. So unlike Fortitude, the Germans are never really taken in by Copperhead. And even with Fortitude, there's only so much that deception work can do. At the end of the day, it's the men who stormed the beaches earlier today who will decide the outcome of the day's fighting. The whole deception program, of course, was helped by a lot of double agents, or fake agents, or
Nazi agents in Britain.
Boom.
Both real and false have been captured and turned themselves in, and the British used them as a big counter-espionage program to send disinformation to their supposed controllers in Germany.
That's what I was, sort of trying to say. The operations are run by the 20 Committee, which is XX in Roman numerals, or double cross.
The basis for the double-cross system is well summarized by John Cecil Masterman. Here he is, chairman of the 20 Committee responsible for the double-cross system. If the words military intelligence are flung at me, I respond immediately with Valmy. Though only a cannonade and not a battle, Valmy was a turning point in the history of Europe. The Duke of Brunswick, invading revolutionary France, turned back. He did not know what was on the other side of the hill. There is the classic example of the failure of military intelligence, the failure to know. The function of an intelligence service is to know what are the intentions of an enemy, to know his plans and resources, the disposition of his troops and their morale. The double-cross system spans hundreds of agents, most of them not real in any way, and dozens of actual agents, very colorful agents. As we will see, it began in 1940 when MI5 captured one German spy after the other as they arrived in Britain and turned them. Soon, there were not a single German spy in Great Britain, and 25 German spies had become double agents for the British. As soon as the German Abwehr sent in new spies, they were captured and turned. It's similar to the German Funkspiel, where the Germans hold MI6 and SOE agents captive, forcing them to transmit false information with one very big difference. Most of the double-cross agents are working enthusiastically for the Allies. In nominal freedom, soon the system attracts volunteers who either defect or have intended to work against the Nazis before they even contact MI5, and the system expands far outside of Britain into the very heart of Nazi German Reich. Then, as Masterman concludes, by means of the double-cross system, we actively run and control the German espionage system in this country. The British now have a new military weapon, unlimited in its range, one of the oddest ever assembled, subtle, multifaceted, and ambitious and highly dangerous to operate. It has one main target: Adolf Hitler's brain. A weapon not based on engineering or science to destroy cities, take down planes or sink U-boats. Instead of killing, it is set out to crawl into the Nazis' heads like a hydra, irritate and confuse them, manipulate decisions, gamble with egos and greed for power, create conflict playing with friendship and trust, suspicion and betrayal. Finally, masterminded illusions to set out a path to their ruins like rats behind the Pied Piper of Hamelin. MI5 Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Arnold Robertson, or TAR for short, here he is, runs the operation of the double-cross system. With enormous trust, imagination, care, precision, and coordination, the Germans are fed carefully composed false information about the effects of Hitler's bombings, British battle plans, and Allied strategies. In the other direction, they are used defensively to obtain information about German military intelligence or to catch more German spies when they try to make contact in Britain, and so slowly lull the enemy into believing he's running a huge espionage network in Britain, when in fact they have nothing. TAR's team could not be more diverse in personality, character, and background. Most of them are adventurous, ruthless, daring, clever, charming, cautious, some criminal, greedy or desperate, none of them with the exact same motivation, but all of them willing to risk their lives in a secret, historic undertaking. All of them face a nerve-wracking challenge, serving and pleasing at once two very powerful and dangerous masters caught in a deadly war with each other. To their Nazi handlers, they have to prove their trustworthiness and seem believable. To their British handlers, they must leave no doubt that they are committed to fight on the Allied side, to destroy the Nazis, and have no intention to blow their double identity to the Germans. In a funny twist, the Brits don't have to pay most of their double agents because the Nazis do. Ironically, happy to have such a splendid spy network in Britain, they pass their agents massive amounts of money. It's good bookkeeping for the British, but also a temptation for the agents not to bite the hand that feeds you. But most of them stay faithful, while the huge amounts of money are not always used for healthy purposes. A lot of the double agents have alcohol and drug problems. Not really surprising considering the pressure they are under. Every bit of information to the Germans has to be approved and discussed with MI5. When it's true, it's transmitted too late, making it verifiable but useless. When altered, so well orchestrated that it looks true, or so misleading that it is, again, useless. And all the time, the slightest doubt in their German handler's mind will collapse the whole operation and possibly end the agent's life. So, most of the double agents come up with a great solution. Blame somebody else. They invent fake agents, and lots of them. People that have never existed. Give them names, addresses, pets, and biographies. So, whenever information is dubious or proven wrong, they can always blame their sub-agent, was me, not to risk their own engagement. The double-cross system has one main goal: to end the war. This war that has by now cost the lives of millions of people has to be stopped. And now, in 44, comes their greatest moment, or as Masterman will later write. From the beginning of 44, all our activities were swallowed up in the one absorbing interest of the grand strategic deception for the Normandy invasion. The climax, which we had hoped for from the beginning, was approaching, and all other aspects of work sank into insignificance. At least for the time, it will be remembered that we had always expected that at some one moment all the agents would be recklessly and gladly blown sky high in carrying out the grand deception, and that this one great coup would both repay us many times over for all the efforts of the previous years and bring our work to an end. It all begins at the Tehran conference when Churchill sucks on his cigar, leans over to Stalin and mumbles, "You know, in wartime, the truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." And Joseph Stalin dryly replies that this is what we in Russia call military cunning, referring to the Chinese general and philosopher Sun Tzu, who said that all warfare is based on deception. That gives birth to Operation Fortitude. When briefed about the plan in 43, Tar meets with Churchill, pacing the room, dressed in his usual tartan trousers, puffing on his pipe. He proposes that the double-cross system shall be the beating heart of Fortitude, and Winston loves it. Tangle within tangle, plot and counterplot, ruse and treachery, cross and double-cross, true agents, false agents, double agents, gold and steel, the bomb, the dagger, and the firing party were interwoven in many a texture so intricate as to be incredible and yet true. But Hitler is very much alert to the possibility of being misled again. He had been wrong-footed over the invasion of North Africa and Sicily, when operations like minced meat persuaded the Germans that the most likely target was not the real target. So this time, the bodyguard of lies cloaking the invasion has to be even more intricate, bolder, and daring. While the physical manifestation of that deception is the spectacular, mesmerizing creation of false armies, dummy tanks, airplanes, and ships, it is double-cross that will be its Trojan horse, a gift of intelligence so attractive that the Germans can't resist it, which carries in its belly a destructive onslaught of misinformation. So, as the autumn of 1943 goes into the winter of 44, Double Cross releases a literal barrage of absolutely insanely confusing, contradictory, impossible to reconcile half-truth and lies. Each piece of information is engineered to support the substance of one of the segments of Fortitude, sending the Germans to prepare for an invasion in Scandinavia, at Pas-de-Calais, the Atlantic coast, the Mediterranean coast, or the Balkans. Just not west of the Seine estuary, in Calvados and on the Cotentin Peninsula. A good 24 double-cross agents are involved in this deception plan for D-Day, but 5 spies and their sub-agents form the nucleus of the operation, being without any question one of the oddest military units ever assembled. Elvira Concepcion Josefina de la Fuente Chadouard, codenames Bronx and Cyril, a bisexual Peruvian playgirl so bored with life she wants to do something fun besides gambling. Roman Czerniawski, codename Brutus, Armand, and Valenti, a tiny Polish fighter pilot who lives and thinks spying, and thinks that the act itself is the highest ideal of human endeavor, regardless of who it is. Lily Sergeyev, codename Treasure, a heroic French woman daughter of Russian imperial refugees from the Bolshevik Revolution, who is a genius, but so obsessed with her pet dog that she comes close to derailing the entire invasion. Dusko Popov, codenamed Tricycle and Scoot, a Serbian playboy with an appetite for sexual adventures and bold business ventures, a high society cosmopolitan who will be one of Ian Fleming's role models for James Bond. Juan Pujol Garcia, codename Garbo and Borfrel, a deeply eccentric Spaniard with a successful diploma in chicken farming, who is Mr. Deception himself and D-Day's inventor of ghost armies and agents. They are far from obvious heroes, yet the soldiers owe these spies a huge and unconscious debt as they storm the beaches of Normandy today. These secret agents fight with their life, talents, and words. I will be back to tell you each of the 5 agent stories leading up to today. And I see you in a little bit, darlings.
Spy stuff is always strangely cool to me.
Well, you're not alone. Would you like to meet one of those double-cross agents?
Of course.
Okay, before I get to the most flamboyant agent on my list, a woman who makes James Bond's lifestyle seem dull, let me say a few more words about Bodyguard and Fortitude. As you know, the plan is to get the Germans doubting and questioning the location and time of the invasion. In retrospect, it will be said that the plot to get them to reinforce in Scandinavia, the south of France, and the Balkans was not especially successful, while the feint towards a Pas-de-Calais invasion was. The intention was always to push the Germans to believe that the main event was to be at Pas-de-Calais, but that it could come in other places as well, or that it might even be a multi-pronged attack, which it also is, but I'll leave that for Indy to explain in the coming weeks. In any case, this would force the Germans to hold back some units. Even if that wouldn't be entire divisions, it would still make a difference, and that is what they have achieved today. A crucial part of the plan was to split up the panzer divisions in France and keep as many of them as possible away from the coast of Normandy. One young, very colorful lady put the final touch to that part of the plan with a single telegram. She is Peruvian, part of the upper classes, and a total party girl. I'll give you Elvira Concepcion Josefina de la Fuente Chadouard. Stylish and arrogant, Elvira grows up in Paris, daughter of a filthy rich guano tradesman and Peruvian diplomat. She's well educated and speaks multiple languages. She also cares little for what other people think of her. She's openly bisexual, loves expensive stuff, fashion, gambling, and partying. In short, Elvira enjoys a pretty posh lifestyle. But she also has twice the brains of most anyone around her and is consistently bored with a life that does not offer her much opportunity to use them. At age of 23, she marries a Belgian stock trader, Jean Choudoir. 4 years and many affairs later, she finds out she has nothing in common with him and bails to the south of France with her super-rich girlfriend. The happy couple continues in Elvira's favorite activity, losing at gambling, until the Germans invade France. The relationship is eventually over and Elvira travels to England, where she tries to find a job. She fails to hold down a translating gig at the BBC, so voila, she ends up spending most of her time drinking at the Ritz, hanging out in London nightclubs, gambling, and complaining about losing. Soon, she's racked up pretty hefty gambling debts. So one day, she complains about her financials to a Royal Air Force officer who mentions her to his boss, a Royal Air Force officer, Colonel Sir Claude Dempsey. Known as Uncle Claude and codename Z, he also happens to be the assistant chief of MI6 and puts Elvira under surveillance for a couple of weeks. Uncle Claude knows the value of a smart woman whom other people assume to be stupid, and knowing about her enormous debt, he explains his idea how he could help her. You have the advantage to travel freely between countries with your diplomatic passport, right? And together, with your interesting circle of wealthy, important friends, you would make a perfect secret agent, you know? If the Germans have the same idea when they meet you, you can provide us with intelligence on behalf of MI6 and get lots of money for it. I will send you to south of France to be picked up by the Abwehr. I know how I can arrange that. In return for £100 a month, Elvira wanders around the south of France for a few months doing pretty much what she would be doing otherwise, playing cards and drinking. Then she meets Henri Chevel, a French collaborator who introduces her to his German friend Helmut Bibi Bleil, a freelance spy. After a week of charming Bibi over dinner and complaining about her financial hardships, Elvira gets Bibi to finally ask her, "How about moving back to England, my dear, and earn £88 a month, and you let us know what's going on in Britain? I feel I can just trust you. I always act on intuition. If I am wrong, it will ruin my whole career." It was, and it did. Elvira immediately informs MI6 and is transferred to MI5 and Tar Robinson's double-cross team. Elvira's case officer, Christopher Harmer, and Hugh Astor give her the codename Bronx for the cocktails she drinks when meeting with them. Her new girlfriend, Monica Sheriff, is an English upper-class racehorse owner, never knows a thing about what Elvira is actually doing when they're not together. Bronx is extremely competent in sending letters to Bibi via Banco Santo Espirito in Lisbon. They're full of girly stuff. I need this, that, and the other. You know, silk stockings and makeup and underwear and blah, blah, blah. Between the lines, in invisible ink, she gives just enough information to be interesting, thwarting gas attacks, political rumors, and press information, mixed up with kind of stupid stuff like shortage of pots and pans and kitchen utensils. Okay, since the mail is notoriously slow and time is of an essence, the Germans soon come up with faster ways if she finds out where the invasion is coming by telegram. Okay, send £80, which I need for my dentist, would mean the attack would be on the Atlantic in a week's time. £30 would mean Denmark, 10 the Balkans. You get the idea, right? So, last week, Elvira transferred a telegram asking for £50, indicating the Bay of Biscay off the Atlantic coast, along with a letter how she has wheeled this information out of a non-existent, drunken Royal Air Force captain on a party. Now, like I said in the beginning, no one on the German side is really convinced that an invasion will come anywhere else than on the French northern coast. Even Hitler believes this is the most probable place. However, they do want to keep the options open for the possibility. Hitler is especially afraid of being fooled again as he was about Torch and Husky. So, they need options, and despite repeated warnings by Rommel and others, Hitler insists to keep his precious panzer divisions ready for any such eventuality. Ty Robertson will credit Elvira's telegram as the nail in the coffin to keep the 11th Panzer Division and the 2nd SS Panzer Division in the south of France, east and north of Toulouse, respectively. From here, Hitler feels they can reach both the Atlantic and the Mediterranean coast in time to fight off an invasion. What they most certainly cannot reach from there is the coast of Calvados and Manche today. After the war, Elvira will retire from both spying and her high-rolling life. She will move to the south of France, open a gift shop called L'Heure Bleue, and live in peace until her death at 85 in 1996. The full details of her story will remain a secret until they are declassified in the coming 2005. That's a while to go.
Sparty, we've been waiting for news of the armored German counterattack, right?
Oh yes, very much.
Well, that is what we're gonna see when we return with Hour 20 of D-Day.